Eureka!
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 It's going to be more easy. Perfect. And as you just heard, the session will be recorded, and later we will share it with you also in the document. And also, like you all know, but just as a kind reminder, please be muted while you are not speaking, so there will be no background noise. And I have a colleague with me sitting next to me, helping me out with all the technical stuff and everything. So as you may have go through the agenda, we will have 2 breakout rooms. It will take just a minute or 2 for us to put you in breakout rooms, but there's going to be like mixed breakout rooms. So it's not going to be you with your other students in the same cluster. And if by any for any reason you just kicked out from the Zoom meeting, just use the same link and you will be back here. So there is no problem. But if there was any other issues unexpected, just let us know, or WhatsApp your other members, and we will know and we will figure out together. And screen sharing is also enabled for everyone. So if after any of the meetings and stuff we wanted to share something, you are able to do that. If not, also please put it in the chat so we can know that. And also for the recording, we are able to only record the session that we are now here. When you go to the breakout rooms, we are not able to do that. So if you wanted to have that, please do it yourself, and make sure to save it on your desktop, not the cloud, so you can also share it later with us. And what else I need to go through? Yeah, I also said about the breakout rooms, and for the agenda. So we will start the morning with a very interesting lecture on storytelling and data visualization. So Laura from Melting Pro has invited a guest, Alicia Corona. She will give us presentation and lecture about her work as a data activist and what does she do. I will not go more into details because she will do that. And after 1 hour of presentation, we will go to the breakout rooms to discuss what we've learned together. And there are some questions, like just some short questions for you to make your mind more structured, to see what we've learned, how we are going to apply these tools in our project, like in the project and research that you are currently doing. And then we will have a short 10 minutes of Q&A and also discussion together. And then we will go for a break. And okay, maybe I need to close my WhatsApp. And then we will come back, go for a lunch break, and we will come back in the afternoon. We will have a second lecture who has been invited by Andrea from Ply and Alexandra Floria. I will also do not go into details because she will give more information about her. So she's going to present about data and technology in community empowering, something that we've been discussing a lot during the past sessions. And it's going to be also in a 1 hour lecture. And afterwards, we will have a discussion and time for a Q&A. Then we'll go for lunch, and after coming back in the afternoon, somehow we are going to see, okay, all of these things that we've learned in the morning, how we are going to use them in practice, but of course in a smaller scale. So it's going to be a very interesting workshop, like participatory storytelling, by 2 colleagues of Laura and Federica, who are Antonio and Sylvia. We will also introduce them in details later in the afternoon. And it's going to be 2 parts. First, they're going to give some presentation about what is participatory storytelling, and just to give some intro for 25 minutes. And afterwards, it's going to be like a long breakout rooms. So we kindly invite you to stay in the breakout room to discuss with your group mates. And they're going to be also moving between different breakout rooms to see what you're discussing, help you and reflect on what you're going to work. And they will also give some information on how they're going to expect us to share the output with other students. There's going to be a mural board link where you can put the keywords and stuff, so I'm not going to spoil it more. And afterwards, we're going to discuss this all together as a group reflection, and we can conclude. And then we're going to close the evening, the afternoon, and go through the agenda for tomorrow. I'm not sure if I missed anything, except the fact I just wanted to say we just heard that a very sad news that one of our colleagues has lost her husband, which was a really tragic news from Italian cluster. So also Laura herself, we're really thankful for her to be here with us today, because she also is struggling with some family issues. So we're sending our love and warmth to them and hope that they can deal with this hard situation. And if you have any question, please let me know. If not, then I will give the floor to Laura and we will go through the lectures.
Okay, thank you, Fazi. And hi to everyone. It's really nice to see you all today. And I'm really happy to present the first guest of our international training. So welcome to Alice Corona. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And Alice Corona is a data journalist, data literacy and visualization trainer, and data activist. She works in-house data journalist at the Sheldon Studio, where she supports the creation of data visualization and data narratives. She's also a contract professor at the University of Bologna in Italy in the field of data communication for statistics and educational content creator at Dataninja. She has worked in Amsterdam as a lead data journalist in the startup Silk, and she has counseled academia, NGOs, and businesses on producing data stories. As a data activist, she is involved in Auto in Venice, a local association advocating for housing rights. Yes, Irene. So Alice is really familiar with two of the cities where we work with Eureka, so Amsterdam and Venice. So we invited Alicia because we believe that it will be really interesting to understand how to take your local and international data and research results in a visual way and through storytelling. So I don't want to take up more time, so I give the floor to Alicia Corona, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and hello to everyone. Yes, I've lived in Amsterdam and Venice, so I recognize a few of the names here, and hi to them, but also hi to everybody, of course. I'm happy to see you. So I'm going to share my screen if possible. There we go. Can you see me?
Yes, we can see this.
Okay, let me just arrange the windows a little bit. There we go. So hello, everyone. Welcome to this session where I'm going to talk a little bit about visual data storytelling, and like with a few examples of work that I've worked on, or examples by other people, which I think can be inspiring. But before I dig into examples and tips and tricks or whatever, I wanted to contextualize a little bit this intervention about narrating data. So as Laura said, I work in Sheldon Studio, which is a design studio working at the intersection of data, design, and society. We work on projects that tend to have a strong, let's say, social justice component. We try to unfold the complexity of a social and global phenomenon to like a broader and unexperienced audience. So not just traditional corporate design, but a lot of it is about communicating data to a general public or a wide audience. We like to say that what we do is we design informative experiences. So what do we mean by this? Let's look at the two keywords that make up this concept. So information and experience are the two keywords of informative experience. And that is, information is what allows us to form understanding of the world, and it's something we get through mediated sources, right? So it could be podcast, newspaper, books, whatever. And so that's why we call it indirect. On the other side, we have experience, which on the other hand is direct. And the problem we faced in our daily lives and also when communicating data is that these two often may be in contradiction, right? You might have a direct experience of not knowing anybody with COVID, not having ever gotten it, and then you might have an opposite experience, and you might not understand what the data is trying to tell you compared to what is your direct experience. So what we try to do at Sheldon Studio is we try to reduce the distance between these two, and that's what information experiences are, like an attempt to bridge this gap. And we believe that the way to do this at the core is it is a question of creating trust, right? So you have to create trust so that somebody who might have a different experience in comparison to what the information is saying can trust you and what you are providing. There are three fundamental obstacles, in my view, in establishing this trust when communicating data. What are these obstacles? Well, the first one is that data lies. Charts also lie, and maps lie, right? So, and we will see why in a minute, but if the core idea is if all of these things lie, so data, charts, and maps, how can we obtain trust when we are communicating data, right? And I will try to propose a few, not an actual answer, but a few ideas at the end of the presentation. But first, just to be sure we're all on the same ground and we understand these topics, I'm going to try to show you why data, charts, and map lie, contrary to what is the popular conception, which these are all things which are objective. Because it is this misconception of objectivity in data, charts, and maps, which is often something that destroys trust when you're trying to communicate data and when you're doing data storytelling projects. So let's start with data. Data lies by definition, I would say, because if we look at the Wikipedia definition of data, for example, we see that data is described as individual facts, statistics, or items of information, often numeric, that are collected through observation. So the keywords here are data, which comes from the Latin for given, and then collected, which means almost quite the opposite, right? So data is not something that is given, it's something that we actively grasp from reality. Continuing with the Wikipedia definition, we see that other two concepts come up. So data is described as existing information, represented or coded. And again, in the definition, we have a hint of the fact that data is not a screenshot of reality. It's not 100% true. And this makes sense, of course, because the whole purpose of data is precisely to understand reality by applying classification, measurements to reduce this complexity. So there's not anything wrong with the fact that data is not objective. It's not 100% a screenshot of reality, right? The problem is when this element of subjectivity is not perceived or communicated correctly. Let's see a bit in practice what this means. So other than the definition, which is very abstract, let's see a few examples that I think clearly depict why data is always a result of human decision. Just think about it, you decide what gets counted, right? What do we include in the data set we're building or that the authorities are building? How does it get counted? So how does it get classified? Even just thinking about classifying gender in a data set, it's a human decision of what categories to include and things like this. For all these reasons, there's always a layer of subjectivity. Let's see some practical example. So the image you see on the screen is from an artistic project. It's called the Library of Missing Dataset, which is essentially the installation that created an archive, so something that really looks like a cabinet, a physical cabinet. And inside this cabinet, you have a series of folders. So it really looks like an official archive by some institution. But instead, these folders are labeled with data set that doesn't exist, that the government or the authorities are not collecting. And so the idea, what the artist wanted to suggest with the exhibition is the fact that a lot of information that would actually be really useful to assess topics of public importance, but that are often maybe about marginalized communities or they don't serve the dominant power, these data sets are missing. Because, who or what gets counted, it's usually the things, the people that somehow serve an interest to the authority that's doing the counting. So a lot of data is missing about topics which are actually very important for the public. An example of a project I've been also involved in, which shows the importance of adding missing data to the debate, I would say, is the project inside Airbnb. So I think you all know Airbnb, right? When it first came out, especially the conversation they were pushing was the fact that it was a tool to empower, normal citizens to rent their extra room or, their secondary home, which they still went through some time to just, round up the monthly bills and make some money. So it was really publicized as a tool. I'm going to cite what they actually said. It was a tool for the people, by the people. And, it was a lot of focus on it being democratic. Of course, there was no data to actually challenge this narrative. They were just the perception of the people living in the cities that seemed that the rent were going up, that they couldn't find a house, but there was nobody saying it was the fault of Airbnb. You just had this idea, but you couldn't really prove it. And that's when an activist, Murray Cox, he created this script where he went on the website of Airbnb and he collected data on all the listings that were actually on the platform. And he wanted to add this data to the debate about Airbnb to show that it was not just, a few houses throughout the cities. It was not just people who had an extra room or had, just a few days of rentals throughout the year. It was actually people who were making huge profits. They were running businesses. They were renting entire apartments, even in cities where it was illegal to rent entire apartments. And so thanks to this data that was not existing before, it was really able to shift the debate that was going on about Airbnb. And I would say he really created like almost a global movement somehow out of this data, because more and more cities started to debate the topic from this data set. He was also able to show that Airbnb was a tool not only of gentrification, but also of racial discrimination. And I've linked a research that you can dig into because I find it very interesting. So all this data was not collected, not published by Airbnb because, of course, they didn't want people to look into it, but claiming the right to access the data and to have the data really shifted how the debate unfolded on these topics. I'm going to close with a final example about why data lies, with an example that is actually about an existing data set. So contrary to the previous two. So in the US, there is a law that mandates that university collect data about sexual harassment on campus. And when you look at the official numbers, what they suggest is that not a lot of sexual harassment is happening on the campuses. For example, this is Boston University. The official numbers say that only 0.04% of the students have experienced it. But then some students, which I linked at the bottom of the slide, the whole research, they looked at, they did an anonymous survey and asking, anonymously around the campus whether people had experienced some form of sexual harassment, and their results were quite different. So in their survey, it actually was about 18%, so almost one student every 5, who said that they had this experience. So why was this? There was this big gap between the official numbers and the surveys. Well, the fact is that the official statistics were based on official reports. So people actually going in the office of the psychologists or the authorities on campus and saying that this had happened. And we all know that it's not it's easy for sexual harassment victims to come out, maybe. And additionally, university, they might have an interest in keeping this number low. So it could be that they don't create a comfortable environment where people feel like they can freely denounce these things. So it actually comes to a paradox where maybe universities that have a high percentage of students having experienced sexual harassment according to the official data, they might actually be universities that are doing better on this topic because maybe they are creating a secure environment where students are comfortable reporting. So this is an example of how you really have to read about the dynamics to understand the data, what it says, what it doesn't say, also to really interpret it meaningfully. So this was a series of examples to show you, to give you an idea a little bit of why many factors influence a creation of a data set, which is always a selection, a representation, a measurement, and a classification of reality. And for this reason, it has a huge human subjective component. If charts lie, if data lies, we could say that charts are like lies squares, right? Because they're based on data with all the problematics that they have, but they also have another layer of human subjectivity, right? Because in charts, we take data and we add a layer of choices that we make in terms of how we represented it and how we transform it into something that can be visually interpreted. What are some things that are influenced by our choices? We can choose what data to visualize, right? We can choose what charts, like a bar chart, a line chart, we can use for that data set. We can ignore the fact that some things in our chart might be misleading. And we can also create charts that are not really accessible. So this is a form, not really lying, but still it's a form of blocking information. And by accessible, I don't just mean, for visually impaired people, like physically inaccessible to some people. I also mean that if you create a chart that is very complex to read, in fact, you're not making the information actually accessible. So if data is a result of human choices, charts are also results of human choices that have always an editorial component, whether conscious or not, whether with good intentions or bad intentions, because sometimes you can create a chart that lies simply because you don't know some basic design rules, for example. So let's see again with a practical example what this means. And I'm going to do it with a topic that on which there is pretty much scientific consensus, so that we are headed toward a climate catastrophe if we don't take action. And so if this is a topic that experts agree on, we would expect that there's data to clearly depict this in a non-biased, non-lying way. So let's try to visualize data on this topic. This is a chart on temperature in the US between 1880 and 2021. So if we look at it, it doesn't seem very dramatic, right? It just seems like a flat line. What is the problem with this chart and why it's not very dramatic? It is, let's say, a design choice of having the vertical axis going from 0 to 100. And the average temperature doesn't really go from 0 to 100. In this case, it's Fahrenheit, right? And so you're basically compressing all the variability of the data in a very small space, and then you're hiding, the trend unless you really look close. So even just if we change this design choices of having the vertical axis cover the amount of data that actually gets, the temperature fall into it in the range, so like 45 to 58, for example, we could also do it even less. We see that we notice the trend better. We see it's slightly going up. But there's still a lot of up and down, right? There's a lot of noise and variance that makes it hard to detect a clear pattern of climate change. We could improve this by adding a trend line. So I added a pink line showing the 10-year average. And then in this case, the noise gets blurred out a little bit, and it's much easier to perceive how the temperature are going up. But it's still, it's still not a chart that makes you want to scream like, oh my God, it's an emergency, right? It's going up, but it doesn't communicate any drama, I would say. And again, the problem is in this case, not about a design, it's about the choice of the data. So true, temperature are going up. What experts measure, it's not like the average temperature every year. They actually have an index which is based on how much the temperature is changed in comparison to a certain average baseline. So let's see if instead of mapping the temperature, we map this index that scientists use. This is a map. This is a chart that we would see of the global temperature. And here you see the axis has the degrees. The temperature was either warmer or colder in comparison to the average of a certain period, in this case, 1850 to the 19th century. So you can notice the trend is actually going downward, right? And so again, we don't have a chart that is communicating the climate catastrophe we're going towards to. And the answer is pretty obvious as to why this is happening. It's because on the horizontal axis, we are plotting like millions and millions of years of data, right? So we're looking at temperature data on the Earth when it was not even habitated by humans, right? It could not be habitable for humans. So we're looking at data which is scientifically approved. It's good data to use for your charts. We are creating a chart that works in terms of design, but we didn't select the right data that it makes sense to communicate for the topic, right? We have to look at years in which humans could actually live on the Earth to see whether it's going up or down, right? So let's map again this data, but selecting a different time span. In this case, I've looked at data for 2018, 2022, and the trend is still going downward. This is because in this case, we are doing something which is also misleading, which is we are doing what is called cherry picking. So we are focusing on too few data points. In this case, it's also years during which we had the COVID pandemic. So perhaps environmentally, it was a little bit better, right? And so we see that the trend is going downward, but it's not really meaningful. So we've done this cherry picking in a way that is useful to support a climate deniers narrative rather than what is actually happening. So we have to make a compromise. We don't have to visualize millions of data. We don't have to visualize too little data because this could hide the picture we are interested in communicating. And so this is a chart which perhaps makes more sense in terms of years that we include. So we are looking only at the average temperature between 1880 and 2022. We have the pink line showing the general trend to get rid of the noise. So this is a chart that works, but it's still not very perceived as dramatic, perhaps because it's very wide, right? But it's very short. So when you have a line chart with this type of aspect ratio, the trend is perceived as very diluted, I would say. You could make a different choice and change the proportion that you would get a chart like this, which on the opposite, it's exaggerating the trend. Well, it's not exaggerating, meaning it's correct in terms of data and everything, but the fact that it's so compressed, the perception that you're sending off is that it's exaggerating a lot what the data looks like, right? They look like different data sets, basically, if in terms of human perception, even if they are the same data set. So a compromise might be something like this, which is a chart which is a bit less extreme in terms of proportion. And so it's communicating this trend in a way that is consistent with what is happening for the data. And so I hope this showed you how even small, tiny choices in terms of, width and height of a chart or, colors and everything, sorry, not colors, other things, they really impact the perception people have of the data. And with this example, we didn't even touch upon two very important things when it comes to communicating data, which are the choice of a color or the choice of a chart type, right? We only use pink, which is not the ideal color, perhaps, to communicate emergency. And we use a line chart, which is only one of the many options. So let's see what happens to how we perceive the data when we work on color. So we could do something like this. This is more effective, right, in communicating. You have the red, which is sending up like an alarm on whenever things are going up, and you have the blue, which clearly divide the data in like a before and after way. And we could also change the chart. So for example, we could have a bar chart instead of a line chart. And here perhaps the perception is even clearer of before and after around 1970. There's a lot more red because the bars occupy more space than the lines, so perhaps it's a bit more alarming. So this is an improvement. The chart maybe works pretty well in communicating the data. It is missing some things, however, that are essential to communication of data. This is because, contrary to the popular saying, data doesn't speak for itself, right? You always need context. You do need text. You need things to always explain the data, even when it's a chart. So let's add some context. And this is a chart proposal that, for the assessment report by the IPCC. They published it like a week ago, so it was really perfect for this. This is a chart they wanted to include in the public synthesis report, and you see what choices were they proposing. You have the line chart with more or less the same trend that we had, And then you have the background of colors, which is reinforcing this trend, right? But then you have something very important, which was missing from our data, which is the future projection, right? So they don't have only the current data, they have the future scenario, which I believe has to be included in this type of communication, because that is where the problem is, right? It's not just that right now we are dealing with a catastrophe, but we will be very soon if we don't change. And so to communicate this, you have to show the scenarios of where things are going. And then they have a few annotations of text that are, it's contextualizing the data. You see here they have, global warming first identified, and you see it also in the data because that's when the colors start to become also more orange and darker. But this was not the chart that they finally published. They did a few other iterations, and they actually published this chart here, which you might have seen going around on Twitter or social media a lot. And I have to say, I love this chart for a series of reasons. So everything I said so far about the use of color and including the projection, including text to contextualize the data. But then they added something at the bottom here, which is what I would call a personalized entry point into the data, right? So you're not just showing the same data to everybody, you're somehow providing a way for people to relate with that data. So they're saying, okay, when were you born, like in the 50s, in the 80s, or in 2020, and when you choose this, you would see that you're not experiencing climate change now, but this is how you will, the world you will live in based on when you will live, when you will be 70 years old. And so I think this is very effective in showing the fact why this is dramatic, why this is urgent, because let's say the dramatic future is here now. So people born in 2020, this is now, this is what the world they might experience. So I think this was an excellent design and communication choice, which explains, why climate change is a problem of the present. And it also in part explains why politicians are often maybe inactive, because they're the ones who fall in this category here usually, so they might not be experiencing it. So yes, I hope with these examples, I was able to show you all the layer of editorial choices that go into the production of a chart. And the idea is, the fact that charts are not objective, it's something you should reclaim and be proud about. It's not bad that charts are not objective, because they need to communicate. And you need to use them to communicate what you feel is important to communicate, right? So you have to understand how to leverage this element of subjectivity correctly. The final example of maps. So maps are, I would say, a subset of charts. So they lie just like data lies, chart lie, but they have an added layer. And let's see why. So just like with charts, we can use different map types, and this has an impact in how we perceive the data. We can use different color schemes, we can use different levels of geographic aggregation, and I will show you an example of what this means. But especially when we create a map, we always have to choose a projection, which is basically, the Earth is a sphere, and you cannot have, a bidimensional sphere, right? You always need to apply some mathematical calculation to convert a sphere into a 2D object. And choosing one projection over the other always have some implication of how we perceive the space. Choosing what to put in the center of the map. Do we want the classic map with the Atlantic Ocean in the middle? Do we want one with the Pacific Ocean in the center of the map? Do we want one with the North Pole up and the South Pole down, or do we want it the other way around? Because, the Earth as a sphere in space, it doesn't really have a center, a left, right, up or down. All these are choices that we make that have an impact in how people perceive the data they are looking at. So maps are, by definition, a necessary lie, which again is not bad. It's the only way we can visualize and comprehend, right, such information. And I'm going to again show this to you with a practical example. So I'm going to take a data set by ISTAT, which is the Italian Statistical Institute. So it's as official as it gets in terms of data. And it's data on unemployment in Italy. And I'm going to show you how even just deciding to what colors to use on the map or what type of map to use has a big impact in how people interpret the data. So this is what happens if I take this data, I downloaded it, and I put it in a data visualization software. This is the map that comes out. It's a map of Italy. The little pieces you see are the different municipalities of Italy, or comuna. Don't mind the technical terms here on the side. I mean, you don't have to understand what they mean. I just want to show you what I'm changing in each one and how this has an impact. So they're a bit technical. They are for people who make maps. So if you don't understand them, it's not a problem. Just focus on the image of the map. So I said, this is the default. And these in pink are all the things I could change on these defaults. And the first thing I'm going to change is how I assign the color palette. This is a statistical terms that I've written here, but essentially, if you compare it, here the colors are like linear, right? From 0 to 39%, I have a series of colors that are applied gradually to the data. But because the data is not linear, so many things are concentrated in this part here, with this operation of changing how the color is distributed, I'm doing something which is essentially matching the color scheme to the distribution of the data. And you see this has an impact in what the map looks like, right? We can see the extremes a little bit better. Here was everything a bit almost the same color. Here it's a strategy to make the extremes come out more and so make perhaps clearer where some things are. Like here we can see a lot of orange and red, which we couldn't really see from this previous map. So this choice of how you assign color already improves, in some sense, the readability of the map. It makes it a bit more extreme in this case. We could take it a step further. So here the colors were assigned linearly. Here we can create what is called, let's say, buckets. So you say, okay, everything from 0 to 7%, it doesn't need to be different shades of yellow. I'm just going to put it all in the same yellow. Then from 7 to 10, I'm going to put it in orange, and then from 10 to 16 in this reddish, and then everything above 16 in this dark red. And so this is a way of making the distinction between the areas, right, even clearer. And this is other patterns emerge in comparison to this one. We could also decide ourselves what these numbers are. So not 7, 10, 16. We could say, okay, these are the buckets that I want, right? Which maybe are more human comprehensible, like 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. And we get a map like this. So again, another change in the colors, right? And then, so far we have worked on a color scheme, which is, from yellow to red in increasing intensity. We could also choose something which is called a diverging color scheme, which means you have two colors of different shades, and you have something in the middle to say everything that is above this number is in one color, everything that is below is another color. So here we are showing every municipality's unemployment rate in purple if it's below 5%, and in orange if it's above 5%. And 5%, I've chosen as a threshold because it's technically what counts as full employment. And so we see that in Italy, the only comunes with a full unemployment are basically here in Bolzano, and some here at the border with France and Switzerland, but essentially they're missing almost everywhere. There's actually one here in Tuscany and one here in Umbria. If we zoom really, really hard, but they're really hard to see. We will see then a technique to make them come out more. But I could change this threshold, right? I could say, okay, 5%, maybe it's a bit too optimistic, especially for Italy. Let's see all the municipalities which are above or below the national average, right? And so 13% is the average unemployment rate in Italy. And now in purple, we have all the municipalities which are less than average unemployment rate, so which are doing better. And then in orange, those with an above than average unemployment rate. And you see, again, the narrative is very different. We see some things that we didn't see in other maps. So like there's some parts in the south which actually are not doing so bad. They're above average, which was something we were missing from realizing in the previous maps, right? And we also see that on the other hand, here at the border, where before we were saying, okay, everybody's doing good here, we see there are some pockets of orange, which we weren't noticing before. We could make this perhaps clearer by not taking away all the shades and just classifying like the region in 3 groups. So region with an almost full unemployment, region with the around national average, and then region with a high unemployment. So we say this color scheme is no more quantitative, it's more qualitative because it's just dividing things in categories. We could also simplify everything even more and say, okay, but I'm only interested in writing a story about unemployment and where it's very high. So I don't need all the noise by all these categories. I'm just going to show a map of just the region where the unemployment is very high. And here we see even better the individual points that are doing relatively bad. And we see, you know, like it's not bad everywhere in, I don't know, Sicily or Sardinia, which actually I usually consider altogether as the South, let's say. And again, in the North, we have places with a very high unemployment as well. Or we could decide to keep the context and use a technique which is called small multiples. So here we have the same map, where we just have 3 smaller versions of it, each one which with its own category of data. And so we can really dig into this in a clearer way without being confused by all the colors at once. And so these were a few examples of just working with color, and you see how much our perception can really change. We have then other things we could work on. We could work on what I call the aggregation. So here we are visualizing the data by municipality. We could say, okay, visualize the data by province. And you see, this is taking away some shades and some nuances. And sometimes you have to visualize data like this because that's just how you download it from the portal. You don't have data on municipalities, you have only data on provinces or region. And so you really see how changing the geographical aggregation of what you're visualizing can either take away some nuances and some shades, some interesting aspects of the data, but at the same time, it can also simplify maybe overall patterns in an easier way. Like here, you clearly see like North and South, for example, the divide. So as you see, even just working on these 2 elements, color and geographical aggregation on maps, has a huge impact in what you're communicating, in what is being highlighted. And the key takeaway here is that there is no answer as to what is the best map I need to use. Like, it always depends on the context and what you want to communicate. So before making a map, always ask yourself first, what is it you want to communicate with the map? Because each one of these is communicates something better, but it's also hiding something else. So you always have to have this in mind when you're choosing maps. Even just sticking with the default and not changing anything, in fact, is a choice. So again, my message is always reclaim the fact that visualizing data is a choice that you make, and so make it consciously. And there are other things you could change in maps. I'm not going to cover all of them because then, you know, it gets technical. I think also this perhaps was a bit technical. For example, you could change the map type. So the maps we saw before, they are called choropleth maps. And this is another example by Donald Trump. So when Donald Trump was about to be start the process for impeachment, he said, you cannot impeach me, you cannot remove me from office because look how many people voted for me. And he showed this map. So the map, what can we say? The data is the official data. So again, it's not objective, but it is as official as it gets. So it's not lying with the data that he's using too much. And he created a map, which is also correct, meaning that's the United States. And in red, it's every place where more people voted Donald Trump. In blue, it's every place where more people voted for Hillary Clinton. Or Biden, I don't remember what election it was. That's it, 19, so it was before. And so what is the problem with the data? That he's showing just the geographical areas, but if we look how many people voted, how many people are living in these places, you get a very different picture. You get a map like this, right? Why? Because many of the places here that were completely red, in fact, are basically inhabited. There are like very few people, right? So if you create a map where the geographical element, the areas are prominent, of course they appear because maybe they're very big areas also. But then if you normalize by how many people live in those places, you see that the picture is quite different. So again, not only colors, not only geographical aggregation, but even what type of map to use. So the choropleth map, just to give you the technical names, or this is a proportional symbols map, even choosing between one of these two has an impact in how the information is being perceived. And imagine with all the other map types that are possible, like really how many possibilities you have. So to recap, there is no way you can not lie with maps. Just be proud of it and make the decisions that need to be taken in a conscious manner, never sticking to the default unless that is what you want to do. So data lies, charts lie, maps lie, and then there's a whole other layer of, the obstacles that the readers have when they look at the things you have created, like all the sort of mental biases, echo chambers, polarization. So all of this really somehow makes you want to say, okay, then why are we doing it? Why does it even make sense to visualize and communicate data if there's so much things that could go wrong in the process? One way we work at Sheldon Studio is saying, okay, we believe it still makes sense to work with data. And the starting concept is the idea that opening data is just the first step. So there's government, there's institution, they make the data available, and this is called opening the data. But then we, as designers or communicators, we need to take this one step further, and we must, let's say, open the open data. And what I mean with the open data is, I mean making open data approachable, accessible, understandable to a broader and often unskilled audience, because it's very easy to be unskilled when it comes to data, right? It's not easy. You need to know statistics, you need to know design, you need to know so many things to correctly interpret it that basically almost everyone is unskilled when it comes to reading data. Like it's really just a minority of people. And we believe you can do this by designing digital commons. So instead of just writing, articles or things like, standalone pieces, we believe it's important to design projects that act as a knowledge base, that are easily available and people can keep coming back to and exploring. And to do this, just to make a scheme out of it, we believe, institution, organization, enterprises, they create this open data, and then what we would do, we transform it into these digital commons, which I will go into detail in a moment, so that the data becomes really accessible either directly to citizens and policymakers or to journalists who then, again, make it accessible also to citizens and policymakers. But how do you create digital commons? We have a framework that we try to use within Sheldon Studio, which is made out of three concepts. So the first is translate. So translate data into something understandable. Relate. So design entry points so that citizens can relate to a broader phenomenon or broader data set. And then finally, enable, which means enable citizens to understand and develop the skills to critically approach information and data. So not just for that specific project, but just we hope that with every project, we are also contributing to an increased critical data literacy that will also be applied in the future. And let's see how this scheme plays out in a few projects that I've done with Sheldon Studio. So the first one I'm going to illustrate is mapping diversity, which was done with the European Data Journalists Network and its partners. So mapping diversity is an online tool to monitor the inclusivity of street names. And for now, we are focusing basically more on gender inclusivity. Because, well, street names are an important proxy of things in our society, because they are a question, of course, of memory, what we chose to remember, of legitimization of the past, of construction of, what is the collective historical memory that we want. They're a matter of representation, so to what extent citizens feel represented and included in their city, and also a matter of positioning in terms of how mayors and politicians, what position do they want to take in the topic of, new sensitivities and needs in terms of street name representation. So the mapping diversity project we did is not the first one to do this. There's many projects that try to investigate, gender balance in street names. This one is in Italy, toponomastica femminile. Then there are other ones across Europe. So it's not like we're doing anything new in terms of thinking it's an important topic or visualizing the data. But if you look at these topics, many of them, they really stay in their filter bubbles, let's say. So, the one in Italy, it's really about, it's a feminist group with many feminists working on the topic. If you ask the general public, they probably never heard of it. And also the other European project I showed you, they're projects made by the data community or the mapping community. And so they're seen more as a technical challenge as to how do I visualize this data. What we wanted to do is do something that made this data more closer to the general public outside of, academia, mapping communities, or feminist groups. And so the idea, as I said, was to embrace a broader audience on this topic. And we chose to do it through a technique which is called scrollytelling. So scrollytelling essentially means that you don't reveal all the information at once, you just reveal small pieces of information gradually as a person scrolls through the page. So the person also has an active role in deciding, when they're ready to go to the next step. And so it's an approach that is really useful to support a comprehension of data and complex matter, because it's really breaking up the information and avoiding, information overload and being overwhelmed. So just to show you what it looks like, and it's in Italian, but we just launched the European version a few days ago. So if you go now, you will see the European version, but you see it's showing one number at a time, one statistic at the time as you scroll. It's not like this full body of text. And so it's gradually revealing complexity. And yeah, so one number at a time. Then we also have city profiles. So again, you have data on the city. And again, the information is built up gradually. So first we say, okay, this is the total number of streets. This is the number of streets that are for a person. And then this is the number of streets dedicated to men. And this is the number dedicated to women, because most of the streets actually, they're just binary. There's no other gender identities in the street in most of the cities in Italy. So it's, again, not showing the whole data at once. It's really showing you step by step the different elements of the narrative. And then it has other elements other than the scrollytelling, which we believe are functional to the project, which is when you finish scrolling, you can automatically generate a social media card with a graphic with the statistics for that city. And so you don't have to do it by yourself. You just copy the link on Twitter and you automatically have this social media card, which is something we use in many of our projects, because it's a way to somehow transform the readers from passive absorbers of information to activists in a very effortless way, right? You care about the topic, you saw that Bologna in Italy is doing bad, so you just share it on social media in a very quick manner. And then we also try to combine, the more quantitative data about the numbers with some qualitative data about the people being represented. So if you go over on each street, you have a small profile of the woman. So just giving a body, a face to what is otherwise a row in a data set is something we believe creates a connection, right, with the numbers you're looking at. So as I said, the data is now available also for other European cities. If you go on the link that I shared of the project, and we didn't look at all the cities, we're working on it, but of the ones we looked for, the highest value is now in Stockholm, which is 19% of streets dedicated to women, which I have to say I was surprised. I was expecting more, but for now, this is the highest number we have in the data set. So how does this project fit into that framework I was telling you about of translate, relate, enable? So the project makes available the data, which is otherwise pretty hard to access, because you have to know skills related to extracting data from OpenStreetMap, merging it with data from Wikipedia. So there's all this process, which is very technical and complicated to know how many women are in the streets of your city. Then Relate, because it offers reader-centered storytelling. So yes, the homepage is about all of Italy, but then most people will look for their specific city and just look at the data for their specific city because that's what they care about. And then the enable component is what I told you about the sharing on social media, right? Because you're turning people into actors that can actually do something with the data and with the knowledge they just achieved, and they can have an active role in spreading this among their communities. The second project I wanted to illustrate is called Local Climate Change. And we see some similar aspects. So the data comes from an open data set, so it's open data provided by the European Copernicus program. It's data on temperature, on daily temperature, on every municipality in Europe for 40 years, from 1961 to 2019. So it's a huge data set. Like imagine every city in Europe will have daily temperature for 40 years. I mean, even if I work with data, I couldn't open and access this data set. We really had to ask technical people for help. So this means it's public data made with our money. They make it available, but still only a small fraction of the people in the world probably have the tools to analyze it and process it, to know like how many degrees is Venice hotter than it was 40 years ago, right? This is a question we might have, but to have this answer, we really need tons of technical skills. And if you go on their website, they visualize all this rich data set like this, and which we believed it was a failed opportunity because you have all this granularity of data on every city, but then you're visualizing it in an aggregated way, which doesn't feel very empathic. It doesn't really create a connection with the data. You look at it, and again, like with the charts before, you don't feel worried, right? And this is a bit in line with what is a problem with climate change communication, right? Climate change is always perceived as a problem of somebody else, of the polar bears in the North Pole who cannot find some ice, or people in Southeast Asia where the cities are being flooded. It never is perceived as a problem of, us Europeans, which are privileged to live in cities and so on. And this, of course, the problem is not data visualization only, but data visualization is something we could work on to try to limit this as much as we could. And so we began designing the project with a concept of care, right? We care about what we love. And so we had to find a way to activate this care related to the topic. And again, we thought of a reader-centered storytelling. So finding a way to connect the general picture, the global problem of climate change, to something which was very local and relative to the individual stories of each of us. So other than the aggregated visualization, which we saw was in the homepage of the data set, we made a dot-based map, which would allow citizens to find their own places to look at, the ones they experienced, such as where they were born, where they grew up, where they had the first kiss maybe, or where they studied, where they had, fantastic holidays or just terrible experiences, whatever. And so the result is a map like this. So it is now a map with every single municipality of the data set. So it's a map with more than 100,000 dots, other than the overall view. And this is a way to create a personal connection to specific places and then to the data about those places, and then to reduce the distance between the people looking at the data and the global phenomenon, to activate the thing that we can relate to the data about the places that we care about. And we hope that this was a contribution in changing this perspective of transforming climate change as a problem, not of others, not of the polar bears, but of us. Because if you look on the map, you really see that many places are red. And also compared to the aggregate map, this kind of map supports, let's say, a particular storytelling of, maybe you find something that is red, and then you find that a few kilometers away, something is green. So this could be also a tool for policymakers or activists to say, okay, what is this place doing that is better? Do they have more trees? Are they building less skyscrapers? Are they, what are they doing? So it's not just a storytelling tool, it's also something that raises questions, and just by going into detail. And then when you click on a single project, it activates a narrative personalized to that city. And as you can see, for example, there's a line chart, but we always include some text to explain and contextualize the data. So even that people who are not familiar with climate data can have some context and can interpret the chart in an easy manner. And then again, there's storytelling. So you scroll and other information comes up. So for example, you start by zooming in on your city, but then at the end, we have an overview of the other cities in your area. So again, you can see, broaden the view and see if somebody's doing better, for example. And also in this project, at the end, we have the social media cards that you can share. So each place you have this, at the end, there's a link, a thumbnail, and you copy the link and you can share it on social media to, again, enable some action on the data. And we were really surprised at the amount of cards that were shared. And particularly we were surprised that, usually you have projects like this covering, I don't know, Rome, Milan, Paris, or the bigger cities. But then in social media about this project, they were all people sharing data about really small places, which I never heard of in some cases, even if they were Italian. So it really shows that you can empower, a new narrative also about climate change by going like in this very hyper-local perspective. So to summarize, how does this second project fit into the framework? So it translates data that is otherwise, I would say, inaccessible to 99% of the population, including technical people like me. So it's really hard to process the data. It makes it relatable by offering this place-based storytelling. And then again, it enables both the understanding of climate data by having all the annotations on every data that's being shown and showing it in a way that is accessible also to people who are not very literate on the topic. And then by giving people the tool to spread this data in their communities. I'm going to close this talk, not with one example, but with something which I believe might be useful for the things you're going to work on and the things you're going to hear in the rest of this session, which is the concept of participatory data physicalization, which is a way to communicate data as well. So data physicalization is basically when you translate data into artifacts that can be touched, that can be smelled, that can be accessed with other senses, not just vision. So we all saw projects that were about visualization of data, but then we have data physicalization. This is an example of what it means. So this is an installation that in the US about migration and all the people who were trying to cross the border with Mexico and then died while crossing the border. And so each of these tags is like the tag that they put on the bodies that they find. And so it's really an embodiment of that data to communicate, these are the people that went missing. It's not just a line chart. This is much more physical and much more empathic, I think, to communicate data. And it does so in a way that you can touch physically. But then I talked about participatory data physicalization, which takes the concept beyond. So when you have participatory data physicalization, you're not just physicalizing the data, you're also turning the participants, the visitors into participants. So into people who can actively create data with their actions with the installation. It might sound very weird. So again, a few examples. This is Jose Duarte. He's, I don't know if you call him artist, designer, a bit of both. And he's famous for these installations that it has around cities where he has a question. So here he says, how can I improve the co-living with my neighbors? And then there's a box with different balls, and people who pass by, they vote on what strategy they would use to improve their relationship with their neighbors by putting the ball into how they would reply to the question. Other example of what he did, again, he has questions around the street and he has people voting with pins. In some cases, he has stickers. So this is what I mean by participatory data visualization. It's not an Excel spreadsheet. It's people physically creating data by answering, for example, questions or other things. And Sheldon Studio has been involved in some of these projects. I wasn't actively involved in this, so I'm going to talk about them, just saying what they are, but then in case we can have more questions. So this is an installation about it was about, the topic was cancer, and then the communication was about, what type of behaviors could influence it and how much do you know about it. And so people had all these tokens or all these actions they could do to vote and answer questions, and their answer would create a data physicalization by like stacking things or by passing a string through a wall. Another project that involved participatory data with physicalization by Sheldon is Cortili in Azione. It was done in Turin. So Cortili in Azione, which means I would say schoolyard in actions, I think it translates, is a project for different neighbors of Turin to transform the schoolyard into community spaces through participatory design methodology. So a place where children, parents, they get together, and residents and teachers, they get together and they exchange knowledge, experience, they play some games, they had fun, all the while trying to decide what to do with this community space. And so there we also had this series of physical objects, which were facilitated by educators in a workshop to encourage children to think holistically about nature and what they would like to do with this environment that actually belonged to them, even if nobody was using it. And so they had they went to tie knots on trees to talk about how many trees were in the spaces they were playing in school. Or there were some boards where children could put stickers just to communicate, how they felt when they were in nature, or also how nature feels when it's free to grow. So there were all these type of participatory data physicalization objects, which were whose goal was to come up with a common vision for what to do with these public spaces. Okay, so a few slides to wrap up this many things that I've said. So what are some strategies to try to overcome, let's say, nihilism about communicating data? I would say, first of all, always consider interdisciplinarity. So all the projects I show, they're never about one person in front of an Excel spreadsheet, crunching numbers and visualizing things. It's always, people like me that I work with data and understanding what are things we could extract from the data and what are things that are interesting for the audience. And there's, traditional designers, there's developers, there's, in the case of Cortili in Azione, there were architects as well involved. And then there were, climate change experts when we did the project on climate change. So it's always a team effort. We also try to value collaborative design. So in the case of Cortili in Azione, talking with teachers, talking with politicians. In other projects we did with disability, we try to talk to disability activists and communities. So always try to talk to people, actually, which is also very fun. Then I would say also methodological transparency is important. So we saw at the beginning how data always lies, right? And so if you want to build trust, you have to be honest about this. So all our projects that have data, there's always a methodological section saying, this data is not perfect. This is all the limits of the data. These are the things, that we said are like this, but they could actually be a little bit more like that. So we always try to really disclose the limits of the data we work on, especially in the project with the streets. That was important because, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty in how you tag a street, how you assign it to a person. So we really try to educate also on the limits of our projects. With the core idea that, data and this type of project, their core goal is, yes, to inform, but also to empower people to understand more about how to read charts, how to work with data, how not to be scared of data because it's this huge data set, but it's actually something fun. And so this is what we strive for, and we believe is the common goal of all the different projects we worked on. So this was my intervention. Thank you a lot for paying attention through all of it. And of course, I'm here now. We have a few more activities and questions, but for now, thank you. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Thank you so much, Alicia. It was really inspiring, and I think there is a lot of interesting input for our working groups. Many times we had talked about how to create maps, graphics, how to find a more communicative way to tell to people, to communities, our to transmit our researchers, our data. So thank you. I think it was really, really interesting. Thanks again.
Yeah, I also wanted to really thank you. First of all, so on time. We are exactly at the right time. And then if everyone agrees, we can give a round of applause because we did really enjoy that. And yeah, I guess that was a lot of things to process. I learned a lot of new things. I took a lot of notes. And that would be nice. I don't know if it's possible for you, but now we're going to go to the breakout rooms so that the students can just go through all these data that you gave them to have a little discussion. And as a co-host, you have the possibility to go between the rooms. You can just click on the breakout rooms and then decide to go to different rooms like 1, 2, 3. So we're going to make 6 breakout rooms, and around 60 students will be in each of them. So it would be nice if you can just stay with us, and also for the Q&A afterwards, because I'm sure that a lot of things will pop up. And yeah, again, that was super interesting and inspiring. And thank you so much for your time and great presentation. So no time to lose. I guess we can go, if you can stop sharing, just
sorry.
Before we go to the, yeah, perfect. So I already see a lot of thank you messages in the chat. So it's a good sign that everyone enjoyed. And so yeah, we'll just be directed to the breakout rooms, and for the like members, like the academic and non-academic members, if you want, you can stay in the call. If you want, you can join the breakout rooms, and you can also move between the breakout rooms. So feel free, and I guess we will be back after 15 minutes. So let's say 11:32, we'll meet each other here. Sounds good? Perfect. Let's go to the breakout room and we'll discuss 3 questions. It's already in the documents, but I will also put it here. But I mean, like the things that Alicia shared with us were super interesting, that we have a lot to discuss, I would say, but just for your record here, and maybe we can go to the breakout rooms.
Just to say that I don't think I see the breakout rooms to join. I'm looking.
Oh, like a window didn't pop up on your screen to just join a breakout room?
Yeah, and I clicked join, but then everything, it disappeared. I didn't get in the room. I don't know why.
Okay, I guess you might have the chance to just click on the breakout rooms on the
okay, yeah, now I see.
bottom
Okay.
of the page, yeah, and then you can just decide yourself to go to different breakout rooms.
Okay, so I just go 1, 2, 3, like in order a little bit.
Yeah, it's up to you, however you like, but I'm sure that the students would be more than happy to have you while they're just discussing.
Of course, if you need 2 minutes just to breathe a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
No problem. Okay, I will go then.
Yeah.
Also, for the students who are still in the room, I see Marta, Lila, Franco, Francesca, and yeah, if you can just join the groups, because some groups are not full yet, that would be nice. Maybe if you're hearing me, if you're not in the toilet or whatever, please join the breakout room.
Eureka!
Eureka!
Eureka! Eureka!
Eureka!
Eureka!
Eureka!
Eureka!